Minister, thank you for being with us today. There has been a lot of interesting things said about Ukraine, its prospects in Europe, that have been discussed here over the last couple of days, but also in Brussels. And I thought maybe we could just start with the question of Ukraine's prospects in Europe and what would be the most urgent reforms, do you think, in Europe in order to deal with Ukraine longer term?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the invitation, of course. I think the war and the way we react, we as a union will react to this war, will define the union profoundly for decades, much more fundamentally than our intellectual deliberations like a strategic compass. Very important, of course, but reality is always much more influential for the reality of this organization, or the deliberations about autonomy, because now we have a big reality check and we see what we can do, where are the limitations as well. And I think this is absolutely fundamental for the future of this organization. And we know very well that to respond to this barbaric attack, we have to take immediate actions. And we are doing this. I think it is, many things are absolutely unprecedented, and no one would expect that the Union can be so efficient in adoption of many things. The humanitarian assistance, military assistance, political, economic assistance, the swap line to preserve hryvnia and basic functionality of the state of Ukraine. Of course, the building the readiness to day one after the war for reconstruction. I think it is pretty good. Of course, we are, let's say, disappointed that we are waiting so long for the sixth package of sanctions. And here we have, I think, the point of reference for the reform, at least for many politicians in Europe. And of course, we express this disappointment. For our neighbors, colleagues, friends around the table, I think it's pretty clear that we are disappointed by this shortcoming, by this problem we have. We hope we will solve this problem soon. But anyway, it shows that Union is efficient and Union has some limitations in the same time. For many politicians, the conclusion is very simple. Let's go for QMV on sanctions and we'll be done. And this answer for this problem we have, the problem is real, is very attractive, I have to admit. I have to say that it looks very attractive, at least at the first sight. But at the same time, we have to realize that the QMV in things like sanctions, or maybe wider in international affairs, international CFSP, would create also the risks. The risk is of every QMV, in every matter. The risk is that we would easily alienate interest of some member states. Maybe it would be a systemic alienation of interest of some member states. We already have some experience with QMV after Lisbon. I don't want to develop, but we have a mixed, let's say, experience with QMV after Lisbon, and especially with this weight of a vote among the member states distributed again after Nice, definitely mixed emotions. So we are of course ready to discuss the problem, but we want to raise the other side of this problem, that QMV means a higher risk of alienation, and systemic alienation means a quite profound risk of disintegration of the Union. And we don't like the disintegration of the Union. We believe that the union of many, union expanding, union with a proper scale, even bigger scale than today, is an asset. It is not a problem for Europe, it's an asset. It's the base for the delivery of right answers for international, global challenges we have ahead of us. So we would like to to balance this debate about possible QMV in CFSP and sanctions, to balance with different perspective, that it looks good, but it brings also problems, risks.
Do you think in this specific situation that we're in now involving Hungary and the oil embargo, that this is actually kind of a convenient scenario for some other members who can hide behind Hungary, who really don't want?
Oh, definitely, yes, of course. It's easy to talk about Hungary because of many different reasons, but of course we can't reduce the problem to Hungary only. And some of the problems, some of the limitations are real, and we don't want to underestimate the real limitations. Of course, we would like to add one word about the source of this limitation, and the source of limitation of many capitals is strategic mistakes made many years ago, not so many maybe, but many years ago, about energy diversification. Poland has been right about massive investments to diversification, to market integration, and that's why we are in 2022 ready to cut off Russian fossil fuels timely. Some other capitals believed in different models. For example, Berlin believed that building the dependency means also mutual dependency. It's attractive theory. If it would be true, it would be good because we would avoid war. But this model would be effective only in a situation when both sides, I mean Germany and Russia, share the same rationality, the same logic. And of course, it is not true in case of Russia. Now we know it very, very well. I think it would be possible to know it even before the war, and that was a big strategic mistake. That's why we have some limitations in Berlin. We have some limitations also in Vienna and some other capitals, and they are probably very happy to be able to hide behind Budapest, but we should be serious. It is not only about Budapest.
There's a lot of momentum now, I would say, concerning Ukraine on the question of granting it candidate status. It's something that the Commission President seems to be pushing. But if you talk to sort of senior politicians in some of the bigger countries in the EU privately, they express a lot of reservation about this and a lot of skepticism about it. What do you think the prospects are of Ukraine, number one, getting candidate status, and number two, actually joining the EU in any sort of reasonable time frame?
Yeah, of course, I'm not ready to report any private conversations with politicians. As long as I'm active, I will abstain from this sort of opinions. But of course, you can notice, even without this knowledge, that the capitals are in a different position toward the problem of the candidate status. We believe that, first of all, candidate status doesn't mean membership. And we should remember, of course, for public opinion in some member states, probably it's more or less the same, and that's why we are in trouble. But the candidate status is just this. It's just the candidate status, nothing more. Nothing less, but nothing more. And we believe that positive answer of the European Council to positive, I hope, avis from the European Commission would be the right answer for the situation we have. What sort of situation we have? Russia decided to change basic fundamentals of political architecture in our part of Europe, in essence in Europe, because we don't know where is the limits of this experiment. They decided to do it by force, by brutal, barbaric force. We can't be passive in this moment, and we can't passively say that, okay, we note the problem, we know the change. Just opposite, we should send the message that we do not agree for this sort of change of political architecture by barbaric force. Then I think among many other things, of course, I don't want to reduce the problem of European response to Ukraine only to candidate status. There are many, many things I already mentioned, but among the political instruments, I think we have a good instrument which should be used, which is the positive dynamic for the possible perspective, European perspective for Ukraine. It doesn't mean that we want to change the rules, the conditionalities related to the accession process. It wouldn't be wise to propose things like this. Of course, this process is conditional. The country has to meet not only criteria, but meet the goals of the negotiations. In the end, we have accession treaty, and we have to maintain the unanimous support and understanding. That's okay. But I think for the moment, the candidate status would be good and would be proportionate answer from the Union.
But what do you say to people who look at this and say, well, the danger is that you would put Ukraine into a position similar to Turkey's, where, you know, they're promised something and they end up sort of in this kind of endless loop, you know, where they never, I mean, if we're honest, Turkey's never going to join. There's a lot of bad feeling over it, and it's been ultimately counterproductive, I think you could argue. And, you know, I think there is a fear that if you give Ukraine candidate status and you're not willing to really fulfill that promise, and I think a lot of people would look at a country like France, say, and say, well, they're never going to vote to bring in a country with the size of Ukraine's agricultural sector into the European Union, into CAP. You know, why not find some other solution, which is one of the things that I think Emmanuel Macron has been alluding to recently, talking about other options of, you know, political partnership and sort of parallel structures. What do you think about those ideas?
Let's talk about the President Macron intervention a little bit later. I think it deserves a special attention. But first, let me answer to the question of disappointment, of possible disappointment. Let's say the Turkish case, the Turkish problem. First of all, Ukraine isn't Turkey. And Ukraine is associated country with enormous effort and will to be as close as possible to the West. And we have no proof that there is any sort of play with this, say, EU affair internally. Turkey is different, and of course I would be first to acknowledge that Europe is sometimes ineffective in enlargement policy, but in case of Turkey, I think we have to share this responsibility for the, let's say, delayed process, maybe 50-50 for the moment. We are not fully responsible for the failure of this process. I think Ankara is also at least equally responsible for the failure of the enlargement process here. So first, Ukraine isn't Turkey. Ukraine paid enormous price to keep association agreement alive and to follow the association agreement logic last years. This is not the first time they pay with blood for European integration. So we should keep this context in the whole understanding of this process. Of course, the candidate status doesn't mean the real promise of membership, because this is conditional. We shouldn't define it as a promise of membership. But
isn't that how it's going to be interpreted on the street by Ukrainians if you give somebody candidate status?
That it is a promise of being fair about the accession process. This is something what we can promise and we should promise, of being fair, transparent, and open to make a real progress. Proportionate progress together with Ukrainian state and society toward membership. It is not a promise of membership itself. The membership is the very, very end of successful accession process. What else? I think having in mind that context that Ukrainians really want to be closer to Europe, we should also remember that without any sort of integration, political integration with the West, it is not only about Europe, the war and atrocities will come back, because you can't immunize this part of Europe in a way without the integration, the political integration with the West. Well, I think without any change, any closer integration, we will have the same problems in the future. So if we really want to avoid this problem, we have to stabilize this part of Europe, and membership is one of the most important instruments to make this part of Europe safer in the end. Safer politically, but also safer for the people. And I think this is the way we should think about enlargement. We know where is the opposition to this process. And here, I think for internal reasons, for our own good, in our own interest, we should open this debate in Europe, because I see two general principal reasons of skepticism toward enlargement. First is the belief that a smaller union would be more homogeneous and then would be better. I totally disagree with this point of view, because this homogeneity of the union, which is anyway unprecedented among the international organization, is of course important, but this is not the only source of power of the union. The other source of power of the union is the scale of the union. We are a very relevant partner in international trade because we can represent 450 million of taxpayers and customers, and we can expect something from the outside world. This is why we can export the regulatory legacy, the regulatory culture, let's say, even outside our borders, because people who would like to make business with Europe has to follow the regulatory regime in many aspects, in data protection and chemical safety, in agri-food safety, in privacy, one day, probably very soon, in internet governance. So it's possible because we are big. If we would be very homogeneous, maybe, EU6, it wouldn't be so relevant. It would be easier to bypass Europe. So I would insist that this source of skepticism, this, let's say, tendency to think about EU in a very centralized, very homogenic way, it's only partially true. We need more than this. And I think the central point of reference for this thinking is France. And I think the France is like this because they believe that their own administrative or political culture is the best way to do public business. I fully understand the logic, the sentiment, because we used to believe that our way of thinking is the best way of thinking, but it is not the best recipe for the efficient, effective, world-class union.
But do you think, just on that question about France, some people were expecting after Angela Merkel stepped back as Chancellor, and now that Macron has been re-elected, that the center of gravity in Europe would shift a little bit more to France, and that Germany now has a new chancellor who is sort of still getting used to the job, some people would say, and Macron, with all of his grand visions for Europe, would be the one really driving the project forward. There's been some talk in recent days about treaty change again, and it seems that Olaf Scholz is open to this idea, but you know, I mean, it sort of seems like we're going around in circles here. These are ideas that just get recycled every few years, and then they don't really go anywhere. Macron is now talking about this European political community. What do you think of these types of ideas? Because I also wonder if maybe the center of gravity is shifting a little bit further east now because of what's happening in Ukraine and the focus on what Russia is doing in the east.
I think with the experience like this, like the experience of war on our eastern border, it is easier to understand that with the enlarged union as we have today, we have to learn from each other how to express our solidarity and understanding for the problems we have on our borders. Time to time, almost every country is a frontline country for some reasons. even northern country one day will be frontline country when the polar problems will occur. One day it will happen because Russia will be probably interested in testing this question. So every country has to realize that one day we will be a frontline country, and one day we should expect that the rest of the Union will express full understanding, trust, and solidarity. So I wouldn't like to present this problem of geographical balance in Europe as a zero-sum game, that we have to fight each other and to explain what is most important. If Ukraine is most important, or Algeria, or Egypt. No, everything is important because it is our common security, our common stability. So we have to elaborate different instruments. We have different challenges on different fronts, but we have to understand why it is worth investing for the security of others. And Ukraine war is a very good example that I see the Warsaw last month as a great hub for international visits. And I think it is very, very important asset because people that way realize better and better what it is, what's going on in Ukraine, what we should really do. Much more than just declarations, much more than just the disappointment of the Russian behavior. I think it is union in making, in more deeper, not institutional, but political sense. And I think we should think about it like this. But let me say one word about the enlargement fatigue or skepticism, because there's one, I think intellectually much more sophisticated, let's say French model, this centralized union, smaller union as a better union, but also I think this is more important and more risky. There's a second model of skepticism toward enlargement. And it is represented in some northern countries, which maybe not countries, but society tends to reduce the integration itself to net position in the budget. Because this is the only thing we understand, the contribution, the net contribution to the budget. We are relatively fresh after the negotiation of another MFF, so I'm aware about this unproportionately. I think this is the problem. We have to tackle this problem because we are talking about countries, I mean frugals, who are the most beneficial from the trade integration. And I think it's in our best interest to explain why trade integration isn't a zero-sum game, just opposite. It is very, very beneficial for all in the end, and we would be much weaker without integration. So we have to confront this reduction of the integration only to the budgetary burden, to the budgetary contribution, because then we will be in trouble even in case of association agreement, as we did in case of Netherlands. I very much appreciate the Prime Minister's Rutte dedication to solve the problem of faith referendum. We work together to solve, and we solved that problem. But this problem shouldn't occur. This problem shouldn't happen. That was misinformation, massive misinformation, produced also by Russians. And in the end, the whole process, just association, this is a substantial thing, but this is not membership, has been blocked because of absolutely wrong reasons. Many people in Netherlands, probably some other societies are also exposed to this risk, believed that association means military obligation, budgetary obligation, and opening of the labor market. Three absolutely false statements. So I think this second skepticism would be a problem not only for enlargement, but also for the union itself. We have to understand better the logic of the integration.
And if we look back at the Euro crisis, for example, or just really the last decade plus in the EU, what you're describing is one of the reasons that Germany has really been the fulcrum of a lot of these debates. There's been a lot of focus on what the German position is, in the sense that what Germany decides is really the crucial question in all of these debates. And coming back to what you said earlier about the energy question and the misjudgment, a lot of people would say historic misjudgment that Germany made here. I'm wondering, do you think that will have a long-term effect on Germany's standing and political clout within the EU? And are you seeing that already, that it has less sway?
I wouldn't like to build on this satisfaction that we were right and they were wrong about this thing, because I think it would be totally empty. I would prefer to invest, at the moment, to invest in a political change in Germany, which is happening, and we would, as a union, we would do our best to make it more possible. Because it is possible, it needs to be done to make Europe more relevant to the situation we have on the East. And I see, at least in some politicians, in case of some politicians in Berlin, a lot of goodwill to do it. So let's concentrate on positive things. And let's try to move this ship to a better course in case of Russia. I hope this experience with the mistakes, the strategic mistakes in policy toward Russia, will make a better fundament for all of us to be a little bit more skeptical about the way how to tackle with Russia. Russia did everything to explain what they want. And we should be aware about it not only today, tomorrow, but for decades.
We're almost out of time, but I did want to ask you, return to the treaty change question. Are we going to see treaty change? Do you think, is there any chance that it could happen anytime in the near future? Is that going to be part of this ship's journey?
Many aspects of this problem, because, of course, treaty change for Poland isn't a taboo, because we are one of those countries where the European referendum could be won. So we haven't any fundamental obstacle to the treaty change. But we would like to understand what is the goal of this treaty change. And when we read the report of the Conference of the Future of Europe, we don't see too many fundamental reasons to open the treaty. If European Council one day decide that we need the treaty change because this or that, we will not fundamentally against as some other capitals, because those capitals we are talking about are fundamentally against because they afraid that they will lose the European referendum. And this is a paradoxical situation, because Central Europe, against the conventional truth, is a source of political stabilization for the European project. And some other capitals, especially northern, those reductionists, let's say, they are possible, this is not the will of the political class, I wouldn't want to be very clear, but they are possible risky capitals for the future of the European project. On French proposal, of course, we would like to know a little bit more. We don't want to be unconstructive. And the proposal is very generally outlined by the President Macron during the speech in the Parliament. Historically, we have only a mixed experience, because the many models of two-tier Europe, onion union, changing geometric union, and so on, has been proposed for the last 30 years only for two reasons. First of all, to decompose the enlarged union, or to create a substitute for membership, usually totally empty substitute for the membership. So we don't like these two things. If it's real, let's talk about it. But I'm afraid that in the end, we can't find a solution for this problem, because if it's very close to membership, we will ask why we need to duplicate membership without membership. If it's really far from the membership, then we will ask what's the reason to create something which is political fake. It will be irrelevant for the situation we have. This is not, we promote membership of Ukraine not for membership itself. We promote membership because we believe that only integration with the Western organization will create a security context for the future in Ukraine. Otherwise, the problems we have today will come back to us. And we want to build something which would immunize this country and this region from the politics of Russia.
Sir, that's a very interesting answer to end things on. Thank you very much for your time, and thank everybody here for joining us today.